Okay, I'm going to talk about academic publishing. Has anyone published a book chapter, journal article? Just show of hands. Okay. Oh, good. So we do have people who have published. So that's great. I'm going to talk a little bit about academic publishing. I'm going to talk about particularly some of the things you want to sort of keep in mind when you're looking to publish or continue publishing. If you haven't already published, then this is just some of the quick tips. So one of the most important thing in it is to keep up to date in your field. So know what's going on in your field. And so that means you have to continue to read. And I know most of us do that as part of our own learning in terms of our teaching. We keep up to date, but it's also important to know what the journals are that are in your field. That's really, really important to make sure. I always say have a list of those top 3 journals that are really sort of the pinnacle of cutting research in your area. Know what they are, and I would say either subscribe to them, or if you have access, I know the library has some access to journals, just to remain current, see the current work that's been part of those ongoing, ongoing research. So also make note of the key scholars in the field. Whatever your field is, know who those key scholars are and know the type of work that they're doing, because they're sort of the people that when you're writing articles, you're at some point going to go back to their work. And usually those scholars are scholars that continue to publish. They're pretty relevant. Also, there's many types of academic articles, right? There's your peer-reviewed article, which is the articles that are sort of in journals. But I would also say that explore the other types of academic articles that are out there. So for example, many people don't think about it, but book reviews. Many journals have book reviews that they look at the latest books that are coming out, and they require people to write reviews on these books. Sometimes editors will come to you and ask you and approach you, particularly if they have you on a list. They will come to you and ask, here's a new book that's coming out. Would you be willing to write a book review on it? And book reviews are quite short. Usually you're just doing a critique or an examination of that book, putting the key points, the weaknesses, the strengths, and so on. And this was how I got started in terms of academic writing, was through book reviews. Now, we're not part of a university tenure system, so that's good. That works for us at the college, because in terms of the university tenure system, they rank what you actually write. So book reviews are sort of ranked lower down compared to some of the other types of articles. But again, that's the university system, and really in terms of where you publish becomes important for universities, because in looking at things like tenure, they look at where you've actually published and what you've published. In the college system, we don't have that tenure system, so that's really good for us. It gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of where we publish. So things like book reviews. Also, I would suggest that, we are a college. We are in the idea of applied learning, so trade and professional magazines are another area that you can actually publish in. And I think Connie had mentioned that, with trade and magazines and popular kinds of magazines, there's usually deadlines, quick turnaround deadlines that are attached to it. One of the good things about trade and professional magazines is your work gets out there a lot more. It can actually shape policy, which I think is sometimes really more important than sometimes being published in a peer-reviewed journal. The idea is that with trade and professional magazines, there's a real bearing in terms of your writing, in terms of policy and so on. There's also other types of articles, things that people have never even considered, so translation articles. So if there are works that are produced in a language that is not English, you can actually translate those articles into English if you know a second language, and that's another form of publication that people can do. Response articles. So say, for example, you're reading in a journal and there's an article that you see and you've read that article and you don't necessarily agree with some of the methodology or the theory or whatever, or the data. You can write a response article to that. And sometimes that's a little easier to do because you don't have to examine a wide range of literature. You're actually responding to that article, and they usually publish it in the same journal. Review articles, that's another form of articles whereby, you would look at a body of literature right? So articles are not just about doing actual research and producing data. You can look at the theory in a field and actually do a review article of that theory. There's theoretical articles, again, articles that just focus on theory. You're not focusing on data. And then the last one is sort of your research article. This is where you undertake some form of research, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, and you produce a piece of work in terms of articles. So there's a number of different kinds of ways in which you can publish. It's not simply just about doing research and findings and then producing those results. There's a number of different types of articles you can produce. Okay. There's lots of myths about publishable journal articles. I'm just going to give you 3 of them. This is the first myth. Only those articles that are heavily theoretical with sweeping implications will get published. That's a myth. Second myth is only those articles with lots of interesting ideas will get published. That's another myth. And the third one is only those articles that are entirely original will get published. That's another myth. And I know when I was starting out in publishing, I thought, wow, the only way I was going to get published is if I had something original, something that wasn't said before. And I learned that that was actually a myth. So what does get published? Okay. So I just want to, there's a quote down at the bottom, I don't know if you can see it. It says, tell me something I don't know so I can understand better what I do know. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. I'll tell you, in terms of people thinking about what's publishable, well, if your article or what you're doing is interesting, but it's not new, you won't get published. If it's new, but it's not related to anything old, in other words, you have to situate whatever you're doing in an existing research, then it won't get published. And if you have ideas that are not connected to one another, they won't get published. So what does get published? Well, before I say that, I want to also clarify between what's new, what's the difference between new and original. So most of the times, publishers are looking for something new. So new is not something that is just for the first time being seen. What it means is that something that's been around for a little while, but maybe there's not a lot of work done on it. So for example, when globalization was starting in the 1980s in terms of research, it was just starting out. There was this term that was being coined, and people started to explore this. Globalization had been around for a long time, but the form in which it was taking was changing in the 1980s. And so scholars who were doing work started to publish around this concept of globalization. It had been there, but they started to look at it in new ways, in ways that impacted their discipline which they were a part of. So something new is not something that's original, but it's something that's been around for a short period of time, that's something you can bring something interesting to it in terms of your own discipline. Okay, so 3 types of newness that sort of mark publishable articles. Approaches to new evidence in old ways. So if you have something in terms of new data, you may produce an article that is based on that new data, but you're still couching it within the existing frameworks or theories of your discipline. You're just bringing new data to that. Another thing is approaches old evidence in new ways. So maybe you have data, but you're looking at it from a different methodological point of view, a different way of analyzing that data, or a different theory. So data can be out there. You can access data. There's lots of government data too that people can get access to. But if you have a new way of looking at that data, a new theory in which to look at that data and offer a different lens or different insight into it. And the other thing, which I like actually, which is my area, which I really find interesting, is pairs old evidence with old approaches in a new way. So what that means is you can have data that exists, and there are approaches that you can use that exist, but really what it's talking about is interdisciplinary work. So for example, I'm a sociologist by training, but my research is in the financial service industry. So I'm able to combine the kind of discipline that I have with business. So business and sociology, I can actually take my work and write with people in business. And this is what I'm talking about later. The idea of co-authoring is really, really important. Interdisciplinary work is actually work that is being published more so, because we're starting not to think in silos in terms of disciplines. We're actually working together to create many sort of very interesting avenues and perspectives. I mean, we try to tell our students too is that, you know, to think outside the box, think in interdisciplinary ways, and the research has to reflect that. So a lot of research in terms of interdisciplinary research is being published. Okay, very quickly, the hardest part is a lot of people think that, you know, I'm going to write this piece of work, I'm going to write this article, I have this time that I'm going to set aside, particularly faculty who think I've got 2 months off, I'm going to write. And then what happens after the 2 months? Nothing gets produced. One of the things I've learned in a writing workshop that I took as for academic writing is the best way to produce work is to make it a consistent everyday effort. Even if you just write for 15 minutes a day, what they've shown is the results are that people who write consistently in short bouts actually produce more work than people who write in sort of these blocks. So even if you just have to discipline yourself 15 minutes, when I took the workshop, they told me to buy one of those ledgers, those logs, write every day how much time and what task you've completed. And that's where people have been quite successful in actually turning their ideas into articles. Also, if you have colleagues that you have around, I think this is one of the best things. I try to connect with people who are also interested in writing. They're a great support network, right? I enjoy when people send me their material to read. I think it's important. And again, when John and I do the workshop, one of the things we'll talk about is not just about writing, but how to give good feedback. And I think that's really, really important, is to connect with your colleagues. And also, I would encourage you to actually share your work with people who are not in your discipline. Because when I went to a writing workshop, that was some of the best feedback I got on my work, was people who were not in my discipline. They read it from a different perspective and a different eye, and the feedback they gave me was, I found, much more a benefit to me than people in my own sort of discipline. So exchanging articles, having that support network. Start small. Don't, again, I would encourage you to do small things like book reviews, right, to get your feet wet, to give you that little bit of confidence, you know, because an article is something that takes quite a bit of time, and you don't want to set yourself up for failure if you haven't written before. So even just small pieces in trade magazines and so on, just to get into the kind of habit of writing and putting yourself out there and building your own confidence. So starting small is always good. Co-authoring. This is when I produced my first peer-reviewed article. It was a co-authored article. And I think that's helpful, particularly for those of us with time issues. The important thing is to find someone that you can work with. Someone who has the same sort of work ethic, because then you don't want to feel like you're the one carrying all the weight. So really be careful about who you co-author with. I encourage you to co-author with people in different disciplines, because I think also interdisciplinary work is really, really cutting edge. The only thing is, when you come to actually putting that article together, you're going to have to delegate, because sometimes if your writing styles are different, one person is probably going to have to collate everything and write it in a style that is consistent, because again, when you're co-authoring, that's one of the most important things, to have a consistent style. Okay, so where do you find out about publishing? Well, all journals have websites. If you go on their websites, you will see that there will be basically submission criteria. They all have submission criteria. You just go onto their websites. Submission criteria will basically tell you, basically just, you know, what the main things are they're looking for in terms, and also be aware of the journals you're publishing in, because it's not just picking a journal. Your work sometimes fits in particular journals. Go on there, see if your work would fit in those journals. See what the criteria is. It usually talks about the style, talks about page length, and they're pretty strict on those kinds of things, citation styles, all of those other kinds of things. I would also encourage you to look. Sometimes they have special issues or themes, calls, and you sometimes have a better chance of getting published when there's a call for proposals. Like, they'll have a theme that they'll focus on, because what happens is that they usually get less submissions for those themes, so your competition is less in terms of who you're actually competing with. Because usually when you just sort of submit to the journal, you're competing with everybody else. But when they have a specific theme and your work fits in that theme, your competition is sort of less in terms of that. So those are sort of just the quick things because I'm out of time. But again, I'm around in Colt if for those of you who would like more information about getting your work published. Okay.